Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. I'm honored today to welcome to the show Mitch Horowitz. Mitch is Vice President and Editor-in-Chief at Tarcher Penguin, which is the division of Penguin books dedicated to metaphysical literature. He is also the PEN Award-winning author of Occult America and his latest book entitled One Simple Idea: How Positive Thinking Reshaped Modern Life. Mitch has written the new introduction to the reprint of There Is a River, which is the classic biography of Edgar Cayce. The Occult America DVD of his talk here at the A.R.E. is available at arecatalog.com. Mitch frequently discusses spiritual issues in the national media, including CBS Sunday Morning, Dateline NBC, and NPR's All Things Considered. He is also the host of Origins, a new web series on the history of superstitions. And Mitch also narrates popular audiobooks including Alcoholics Anonymous and the Jefferson Bible. His website is mitchhorowitz.com. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections, the wisdom of Edgar Cayce.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And as a first question, I'm curious, how did you first get introduced into kind of researching and writing about New Age and occult topics?
Well, for years, I worked in New Age and metaphysical publishing, and I began to notice that I was coming across the work of a great many American metaphysical and occult figures, ranging from Paul Foster Case to Ernest Holmes to Manly P. Hall to Edgar Cayce. And I found that they all had something in common, which was this core set of values. They wanted spiritual teachings, esoteric spiritual teachings, to be available for self-help purposes to the broadest possible public. And they all carried this through their lives as a very heartfelt ethic. It was at the back of their work. And I felt that their stories, these great American metaphysical pioneers, their stories had never fully been told. They had never fully been understood. Our culture didn't know how to digest them. So that got me interested as a historian in talking about their backgrounds, their lives, their successes, their failures. They were just extraordinary figures that our culture has never understood how to integrate.
How do you see Edgar Cayce as playing in the history of New Age and occult figures?
Well, Cayce has been so important to the development of alternative spirituality in the Western world for two reasons. The first is that he helped to popularize a whole catalog of spiritual therapeutic topics and natural health topics. Terms like karma, reincarnation, sun sign, meditation, concepts ranging from massage to energy medicine to natural healing are all very domestic terms that everyone has heard, most people have some opinion about. But Cayce, before and just after World War II, through his readings, popularized these concepts that many Americans up until that time had heard very little about. So Cayce created a catalog for the dawning New Age. That was one aspect of his importance to the growth of Western alternative spirituality. The other aspect, which I personally find even more important, is that Cayce was such an extraordinary ethical presence. He defined Christianity as a religion for the independent seeker in the 20th century. He was so deeply informed by the Christianity of his youth and his adulthood, and he was so unwilling to just throw out a whole catalog of spiritual topics without syncing it with the ethics of the Gospels and the moral idea at the heart of Christianity, that he labored through most of his adult life to create a kind of universal approach to religion where ideas from the East, such as karma and reincarnation, or ideas that might be considered pre-Christian in origin, such as the existence of Atlantis or certain concepts in astrology. For him, for those things to be true, they had to sync up. They had to coalesce with the ethics and the moral vision of the Gospels. And I think in his person, in his philosophy, in his readings, he succeeded in that. So he created almost a new window on religion, and he gave an ethical foundation, an ethical backbone to the development and growth of New Age spirituality, which I think placed a permanent and very productive mark on the growth of our alternative spiritual culture in America. So Cayce popularized the catalog of alternative and New Age ideas, and he also gave the culture of the New Age, the dawning culture of the New Age, a very strong moral foundation through the vigor of his own spiritual search.
Right. And you've been quoted as calling Cayce a true American. And I'm curious, what does that mean to you when you say Cayce is a true American?
Cayce believed that continual self-improvement was not only a possibility for the individual, but a kind of moral obligation, that we were put here by a creator to be generative, to be productive, to grow. And he harbored this very key American spiritual idea, which is that spirituality should aid and abet the individual's growth on earth and in realms beyond. For centuries, our ancestors viewed religion as a matter of personal salvation. And Cayce certainly didn't move away from that view, but he added to it the idea that religion was not only a matter of personal salvation, but it was also a means of healing, a means of personal growth, a means of practical self-improvement, a means of problem solving. And that's the American spiritual vision, which Cayce embodied in a very great way. This idea that religion is not only to manage matters of our soul, certainly that's crucial and central to all religion, but it's also a tool of therapy, meaning, generativity, self-help, problem solving. So Cayce had this very practical vision that really is at the heart of American spirituality. That is the contribution of contemporary American spirituality to the world.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And in your talks and in your books, you often talk about the importance of terms like New Age and occult and how much they mean to you. But you also emphasize the importance of these terms being clearly defined in your mind. In
Yes,
saying that, what can you please define for us, in your mind, the terms New Age and occult and how they're kind of misunderstood?
absolutely. I feel it's very important that we don't give up terms like that, especially when the larger culture will take a term like New Age, for example, and almost always uses it as an insult. If you come across the term New Age in a mainstream organ of opinion or organ of news, it's almost always being used to discuss something that's considered fluffy, unrealistic, fuzzy-headed. I don't view New Age that way at all. To me, the term New Age, very simply, means therapeutic spirituality. I think the term New Age has very noble roots in the American self-help tradition. The term self-help goes back to the transcendentalist philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson. And the term New Age began to grow popular in the 1970s, although it had been in use for generations before that, as a way of referring to this vast culture of different spiritual experimentation and concept. And the term New Age came to connote the way the individual spiritual realms for therapeutic answers. New Age is therapeutic spirituality. It's a culture that welcomes a vast range of religious and ethical expressions, that encourages the individual search for meaning. I think it's a noble term, and I'm proud to have the term New Age applied to myself. It's not a term that I would run away from, and I think those of us in the metaphysical culture should actively use that term and not allow it just to become an epithet that we come across every now and then in newspapers and magazines that are intended to put people down for having fuzzy or unrealistic beliefs. I think I personally wear the term New Age quite gladly. I think it's a noble term with very sound roots. Likewise, the term occult was simply a term that was come up with by scholars during the Renaissance who were looking for a way to talk about the spirituality of the ancient world that had largely vanished in the Renaissance world following the Dark Ages. They were talking about and probing the spirituality of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and these religions and temple orders had all vanished as institutions. So Renaissance scholars were trying to figure out a way to refer to these ancient traditions that belonged to a vast culture that no longer had any institutions in the Renaissance European world. So they arrived at a Latin term, occulta, which very simply meant secret or hidden, because to them these things were newly discovered relics of an ancient world that had been hidden, that had suffered a discontinuity during the Dark Ages. So they referred to these things as occulta philosophia, or hidden philosophy, lost philosophy, unseen philosophy. They didn't have any sinister attachments to the term occult as it came to be known in English. It was just a shorthand for them to talk about the vast geography of religion that had belonged to the ancient world and that they were trying to reclaim. And it tended to become this term that referenced everything from Kabbalah to the Greek mystery religions to the temple rites of ancient Egypt, things that existed in a small collection of manuscripts written in Greek and Latin that circulated throughout the Renaissance world. So it was only later, when there was a backlash against all this spiritual rediscovery, that the term occult became layered over with sinister connotations. But again, it's one of those terms that has historical integrity, and I don't think we should give it up. It has a certain romance to it. It gets people's attention, but it should get people's attention because it does connote mystery. It does connote intrigue. But those who originally used it didn't have any sinister connotations with it at all. And I think it's a term we should use for its historical integrity.
Right, absolutely. And you raise a great point that it does. It gets people interested. It certainly draws people. I think everyone has that innate draw to discover things that are unknown, and it helps to bring people to that.
It really does. Absolutely. It communicates something very intriguing about the human search.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to, I want to talk a little bit about your incredible book, Occult America. And I'm curious, why were you drawn to writing this, and what has the response been like since it's been published for years?
Well, I've been very gratified with the response. I've had people write to me who said that they grew up in New Age households and they never realized that they had a spiritual heritage, a spiritual lineage of their own. And some people felt that the book gave them a sense of their own background, where they came from, how this occult spirituality was reborn, rediscovered during the Renaissance period, and how it went through different changes and permutations in the Enlightenment era, and was resurrected once again in the era of theosophy at the hands of Madame H.P. Blavatsky in the late 19th century, and how American figures such as Edgar Cayce transformed it into a language that could enter households and churches and living rooms all over America. So the most gratifying emails that I've received from people have been from people who said, I finally realized, growing up in a home that was dedicated to meditation and yoga and natural eating and different self-help philosophies, that we weren't just the wingnuts down the street, but that in fact we were part of a broad New Age culture and history, that we have a heritage, we have a lineage. And that's been just hugely gratifying to me. And that's largely why I wrote the book, because I felt that these occult and esoteric traditions have been such an important and productive part of American history. They needed to be accounted for in our religious history. We can't understand ourselves as a nation unless we understand some of the esoteric currents that have shaped us as a nation. In the previous presidential election, we almost had a Mormon president. Well, Mormonism as a culture came out of what was called the Burned Over District in upstate New York in the early 19th century, which was this wonderful ferment of religious and spiritual experimentation. This was a place where Americans felt a thread of connection to some of the Renaissance occult traditions. So these esoteric ideas are a foundational part of our history, our development as a nation, and I wanted the book to shine a light on that.
Excellent. And it seems that this is such an important part of what you believe as an American. We should know. We should understand our mystical roots. And in saying that, do you think we're doing a disservice not teaching this to our children? And do you take that responsibility upon yourself to help educate?
Yes, I think it's very important to teach this to our children because I think that the deepest purpose of our country, the deepest purpose of America as a nation, is the protection of the individual search for meaning. And as long as we as a nation are ensuring that individuals who have varying ideas are not only permitted but encouraged to pursue these ideas to their fullest extent, I think we are succeeding as a country. I think something is working in America when there's a tremendous amount of religious diversity, and we see it almost as a sacred national mission to protect the individual's right to seek his or her own definition of meaning. So teaching that to our kids is not just good history, but I think it feeds the waters and the soil of our nation today. It's a barometer by which we can determine whether America is working.
Absolutely. And on a personal level, as a father, how important is it to you that you educate and empower your children to always search for the truth and also to keep an open mind when it comes to these esoteric, new age, and occult topics?
Well, it's at the heart of our home, really. We have two boys, ages 8 and 10, and I try to expose them as best I'm able to all of these different interests and ideas. They know about Edgar Cayce. You know, he's the kind of guy who shows up on refrigerator magnets in our living room. Um, I read them chapters from the Jefferson Bible at night, which was Thomas Jefferson's great editing and redacting of the Gospels. They learn about their Jewish heritage. They learn about all different cultures and traditions. And as in any household, you know, sometimes they think dad is boring and they'd much rather be doing other things. But this is what we all experience as parents. And I try to expose them to the broadest range of spiritual experiences that are at the heart of my own outlook.
Excellent. Good to hear. And I want to move on to another topic. You wrote an incredible introduction recently for the classical Edgar Cayce biography by Thomas Segru called There is a River. And I'm curious, what was this process like for you writing this introduction?
Well, it was a very interesting process. You know, There is a River. There is a River is a very unusual and important book in terms of our understanding of Edgar Cayce. Um, I also narrated an audio version of the book, and as I was narrating the audio version, I had, and that'll be out soon, probably very soon after your listeners are hearing us today. As I was very attentively reading the audio version over a period of several days, it occurred to me that the voice in this book really is the voice of Edgar Cayce. Thomas Segru, the author, was a brilliant and distinguished journalist in his own right, and that's reflected throughout the book. But he also was an intimate of Cayce's. They spent a tremendous amount of time together. And you can start to pick up in the book the priorities of Edgar Cayce. Cayce was an enormously family oriented man. He was deeply attached to his Southern Christian agrarian roots. His extended family was a source of vital life and deep importance to him. And the stories that are told about family members and about the background of the Cayce family here in the US, those stories are the work of Edgar Cayce. Thomas Segru is the scribe, he is the interpreter, he analyzes, he frames, he contextualizes, but the priorities and the voice in that book are those of Edgar Cayce. So that book is probably the closest that we can get to sort of an extended session with Edgar himself, where we ask him to explain to us where he's from, what is he about, what are his priorities. And for me, writing the introduction was also an opportunity to frame and contextualize Edgar as a religious pioneer in this country. What did his voice do to American religion? How did he change things? How did he change our vocabulary, our point of view, our sense of what belonged to the spiritual search? How did he expand our parameters? What ethical qualities did he bring to the spiritual search? Cayce was really, in many regards, the founding father of New Age spirituality. There were many, many, many figures who contributed to that, but it was Cayce, through his readings and through the books that spun off from his readings, that created a kind of everyday New Age vernacular where people could say, "What's your sign?" or make a reference to Atlantis or karma or reincarnation. And lots of people from different backgrounds would have some idea of what they were talking about. That's due largely to Cayce. So he was an enormously influential figure in the construction of the New Age. And that's a topic that I spend a lot of time on in the new introduction.
Excellent. And in your latest book, One Simple Idea, How Positive Thinking Reshaped Modern Life, you write about the idea that positive thinking is kind of metaphysically morphed into mass belief and culture.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how this book came about and what the process of writing it was?
Sure. When I finished writing Occult America, I came to the realization that the basic template for New Age and alternative spirituality in America, the one basic denominator that all the different spiritual expressions seem to come back to, was this notion that thoughts are causative. That's the central idea of positive thinking, or New Thought, as it's more properly known. And Americans haven't much heard the term New Thought, as the various mind power philosophies were called in the early 20th century, and still are. But they've heard terms like the power of positive thinking. They've heard terms like the law of attraction, thanks to The Secret. And everybody has some concept that your attitude is going to determine what happens to you. People interpret that to greater and lesser degrees. Some people just see it as a sturdy psychological truth, which it certainly is. Some people see it as a sacred dictum, as a law of life, as a kind of overall metaphysical basis for human relations, for the conduct that we go through day to day, for what we experience. This notion that thoughts are causative is really the closest thing we have to a national creed in America. It unites people all across the religious and political spectrums, from New Age spiritual centers to evangelical media ministries. It permeates our politics. Ronald Reagan would routinely say, "Nothing is impossible." Barack Obama said, "Yes, we can." Bill Clinton said, "I still believe in a place called hope," and so on and so forth. This notion that our attitude is a vital factor in the actual unfolding of our lives is a belief that's held by people all across the country, again, to greater and lesser degrees. Some people see it as a psychological truth, some people see it as a sacred law, but it is the American philosophy. And it attracts a great deal of hostility as well. There are many mainstream critics who feel, as with the use of the term New Age, that it's fuzzy-headed, it's unrealistic, it distracts people from the real verities of life. And I wrote the book not only to document the enormous impact of positive thinking, but to frame it as a philosophy that deserves the attention of serious people. The critics are right about some of the excesses, but they're ultimately wrong about what the positive thinking philosophy, what the positive thinking imperative can mean in the life of the individual. Everybody who's part of any self-help or spiritually oriented program of recovery or therapy, from Alcoholics Anonymous to Course in Miracles, to Joel Osteen's ministry that gets beamed literally to tens of millions of viewers on a Sunday morning, is using this idea of an attitudinal approach to success. And at the heart of it is this very American belief that there's a thin line of separation between mental experience and spiritual experience, that what you think somehow taps in to deeper wells of life and of belief than just a fleeting thought passing through electrical impulses in our gray matter. That somehow the experience of thought and the experience of getting in touch with a higher principle of life are intimately related. That's at the heart of the positive thinking idea. So I felt as though positive thinking, rather than being this kind of sing-song philosophy that belongs in page-a-day calendars and, on inspiring refrigerator magnets, is actually a very deep part of American life. We need to understand where it comes from, who its main players are. I've mentioned some of them in our conversation, figures like Ernest Holmes, figures like Neville Goddard, figures like Mary Baker Eddy. These were vital, fundamental spiritual pioneers in the Western world and in this country in particular. And does it work? Does it work? Is positive thinking a philosophy that has a serious claim on sensitive men and women in the 21st century? Do thoughts actually make things so? Do thoughts actually change things? Not just on a level of relationships and on a level of psychology, but do they actually have some outpicturing causative properties? That's a question I want to ask seriously. I want to approach it seriously. What are the mistakes that the positive thinking movement has made? Has it gone off the rails in certain ways? Has it made hasty assumptions or leaps of logic that haven't been supported? I want to ask those questions too. So that's what I do in One Simple Idea. And I hope it's a book that speaks to the experience of everybody who is engaged in any aspect of positive thinking literature. Edgar Cayce, of course, famously said many times, mind is the builder. That was a sacred truth to him. And probing that sacred truth, asking, does that sacred truth work for 21st century people? That too is at the heart of One Simple Idea.
Excellent. Great. Mitch, we're going to take this moment to take a quick advertising break, but stay tuned because we'll be right back with more from Mitch Horowitz here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Joining us today on the show is Mitch Horowitz, and we've been talking about his books previously, but I want to kind of shift gears to a personal question that I had. After listening to a number of your talks over the years, especially the one at the A.R.E., you've been known to put in quite a bit of time at the A.R.E. library here in Virginia Beach doing research for your books. For me personally, this is very near and dear to my heart because one of the reasons I moved from Florida to Virginia Beach was to have access to that incredible library. So in
Yes.
saying that, what makes the A.R.E. library so special to you?
Well, it's probably the best metaphysical library in our country, at least that's open to the general public. It presents such a remarkable spectrum of spiritual thought, not only in terms of the great foundational works of ancient and modern spirituality, but the remarkable thing about the A.R.E. library is it also contains a very, very broad range of popular spiritual literature spanning the 20th century and the early 21st century. And that is very, very important to me personally, because there are a lot of important and deeply useful ideas that get distilled in popular literature. I consume New Thought books from the early to late 20th century. I absolutely consume them. And, you know, to a certain extent, we're all supposed to be a little bit embarrassed reading books like Your Infinite Power to Be Rich and The Mystic Path to Cosmic Power and The Science of Getting Rich and so on and so forth. These are supposed to be slightly goofy books that, you know, maybe sit somewhere in our grandmother's nightstand, but, you know, contemporary educated folk are not supposed to be seen with those books on the subway here in New York City, where I live. But I read them voraciously because I feel that the people who wrote those books, in many cases, were wrestling long and hard with a wide range of spiritual ideas, and they were dedicated to experimenting with these ideas in their own lives and trying to find what works. And so the A.R.E. library provides a wonderful, wonderful range of popular spiritual works that just span the gamut of the alternative spiritual landscape, from channeled literature to astrology to all of the various New Thought and positive thinking books to all of the various popular books that have been written about Edgar Cayce. So you can walk in there and you can find that there might be someone in the 1970s who had an intimate interest in a topic that is of vital importance to you right now, you know, who might have been interested in the Seth material or some aspect of Cayce or some aspect of Course in Miracles or some other mental spiritual program to success. And to be able to walk up and down the stacks in that library is not only such an opportunity to find those books, but again, it's kind of a spotlight on our own heritage. We do have a heritage in the New Age spiritual culture, and that library may be the one and only public facility that completely documents that heritage. So when you're walking up and down those stacks, it's almost like this hall of records that catalogs our own experience in the New Age culture.
Absolutely. And as an accomplished writer yourself, there are many young scholars who look up to you and admire your writing. And in saying that, who is it that you look up to and admire the work of? And to be more specific, I'll say, who alive today do you admire?
Oh, sure. There are many writers alive today who have been a source of inspiration to me. The philosopher Jacob Needleman has been a source of inspiration. Sidney Kirkpatrick and his biography of Edgar Cayce was a great source of inspiration to me when that came out about 15 years ago. The historian H. Paul Johnson is a source of inspiration to me. Jocelyn Godwin, Richard Smoley, Gary Lackman, Jay Kinney. There's a very, very wide range of folks. Mary Greer, who wrote a wonderful book about the women of the Golden Dawn, women who were involved in the occult revival in Europe in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. The reason why these people and several others have been sources of inspiration to me is because they bring the highest level of intellectual inquiry to occult and metaphysical subject matter. And that's something that I feel is very important for the continuance of our New Age culture in America and for the health of American education and American spirituality in general. We have to set high standards for ourselves. It's not enough to just read books about astrology. The astrologer should know something about astronomy. The person who's interested in energy medicine should know something about mainstream medicine. The person who's interested in Kabbalah should know something about the Hebrew language. The person who's interested in yoga should know something about the history of yoga. The person who's interested in channeling should know something about the prophetic tradition as it's played out across history. We need to have our own high intellectual standards on the New Age culture, because if we don't, our history is going to get written by people who are not at all in sympathy with our values. And it's not going to be a history that we are going to feel we can pass on to the next generation. All the writers and philosophers that I've just mentioned, and a number of others, have brought very high standards to the study of New Age and esoteric, metaphysical, occult ideas. And that's very important, because without that, we will lose the thread of our own heritage, and our own alternative spiritual and New Age cultures will wither. Our history will not get written. Our stories will not get told. The quality of our search will suffer, and the quality of American letters will suffer. So these are figures who, for me, brought the highest journalistic and scholarly and historical standards to their studies, and they showed me that it could be done. They're all living figures, and they showed me right here and now in our generation, we are doing it. So that was inspiring to me.
And Mitch, within your writing and your books, you do an incredible job of uncovering this line, this thin connection that has gone all throughout history, of the general interest of the humans in these esoteric, metaphysical, New Age, occult ideas. And in saying that, as we look forward into the future, do you see our time? Do you see the time that we're living in now as it may be looked as kind of another renaissance of New Age thought and occult philosophy?
Well, we live in a strange time right now. ESP research, for example, which is something that's very important to me, is underfunded all across our society, and actually within academia and within opinion-making journals. Psychical research, ESP research, by and large, has a terrible reputation, and that's not the fault of the researchers themselves, but they have gotten layered over with these kind of continuing attacks from people who are such vociferous critics of any kind of ESP research that they've almost created a kind of counter fundamentalism in a certain sense. It's very difficult for legitimate ESP researchers to communicate with the public, to get adequate funding because of these various attacks on their work, which are shallow but also very skillful. And when journalists are writing about ESP research, they usually wind up writing about it from the position of those who are criticizing its very existence. Some of the brightest and most powerful voices in media are people who have very little respect for the question of the individual spiritual search. And then you have certain fundamentalist voices which don't do us any better. Organizations within the New Age culture in many cases are having trouble retaining members. A.R.E. is thriving, but I think A.R.E. unfortunately is the exception. There are many other spiritual organizations who have a long and august history in our country who are having trouble making a go of it. The yoga studios aren't having any problems, and the weekend retreat centers, by and large, aren't having any problems. But the organizations who maintain libraries, magazines, host conferences, membership lists, they're having some problems. So we are at a kind of a crossroads right now, and I don't know, of course, how our generation will be viewed. I do think that, the internet has on one hand, presented a tremendous opportunity. I mean, after all, you and I are conducting this exchange online right now, but it has also made it difficult for journals and magazines and other things that help to nurture the spiritual search to exist in quite the same way. It's made it possible for people to join various social media pages and organizations, but perhaps less likely to have physical membership and attendance in some of the organizations that have nurtured some of these ideas. I think it's very important that those of us who care deeply about New Age ideas be well-rounded, that we have a good background. I was sort of alluding to this before. If you're interested in astrology, well, know something about the sidereal star system. I think we all owe it to ourselves to be informed, to be well-rounded, not to allow the critics to have an easy time of using terms like New Age in a kind of denigrating way. And the reason why that's important is because it helps give permission to other people to embark on their own spiritual search, to drink of the various waters that are available out there. I don't like to see any idea or movement get defined by its critics or get treated in a glib or shallow or shorthanded way. So I think it's incumbent upon us as individuals to be well-rounded, to support the various institutions of the New Age culture, A.R.E. among them. I hope at some point there will be a turnaround in the attitudes towards psychical research, because I think right now the voices of the critics have served to not derail but delay some of our research and progress into psychical research, because their voices have been so overwhelmingly successful. Voices of the critics, that is. Probably, just given the nature of things, we're due for some sort of a turnaround. Life seems to be seasonal. As soon as we're in the dark of winter, spring is not far off. That just seems to be as basic a law of life as it is a law of nature. So there may be some turnaround. I personally don't see signs of a new flowering of New Age culture right now. New Age is an evergreen on the American scene. It's a fundamental, vital part of American and Western life. So it's certainly never going to go away. It's a basic part of our development and our culture. I don't personally see signs of a new renaissance in metaphysical and New Age ideas right now. But I'm certainly trying very hard in my own little corner of the world to probe and look at these ideas in ways that I hope deepens people's experience of them, deepens people's sense of history around them, gives people a sense of their own heritage. And there are others who are doing that as well. Richard Smalley, Gary Lackman, a number of the other folks who I mentioned, and others besides. So there's great work going on. And the people who attend A.R.E. and some of the other growth centers are themselves doing wonderful work. I run into so many people who are active in one part of the spiritual culture or another, and they're eager to talk to other folks, to share ideas. They move very freely in and out of different worlds. Some of them might attend mainstream churches, very mainstream houses of worship, but they also have New Age interests, which I think is a real sign of health. So, we live in a complex and diffuse world right now. I don't know whether the next generation is going to look back on us and say, gee, those guys did a great job. But I think the best thing we can do as individuals is be well-rounded, know a lot, and support the institutions that are making the New Age culture available to people.
Absolutely. Great answer. And we've talked quite a bit about the intellectual pursuits, and you say, it's important to be well-rounded and to be knowledgeable and to educate yourself, take it upon yourself as an individual to stay educated about what you're interested in. But I'm curious, what advice would you give someone who may be having difficulties coping with these kind of seemingly chaotic times that we're living in and maybe are a little heavily influenced by the critics?
Well, I would say you can always go back to basics. I'm a great believer in the basics. I think that reading the core sources of spiritual tradition are very important. Read the Bhagavad Gita, read the Tao Te Ching, read the Gospels, read the Ethics of the Fathers, read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Whenever you feel yourself lost in a thicket and you don't know how to get out of it and you don't know which way to turn, it may just be time to stop. Just stop. And all of those works are the great nourishing works of the human search and others besides. So when you don't know which way to turn, go back to basics. That would be my counsel.
Excellent. And I want to talk a little bit about your web series Origins. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about and what the response has been for that?
Sure. Origins is a web series on the history of superstition, and we created 13 episodes. Each one is about 90 seconds each, so you can probably work through the whole thing in about 25 minutes. It's housed at a website called originstheseries.com. My friend Ronnie Thomas is a brilliant director who previously did a very acclaimed web series called Midnight Archive, and he and I wanted to get together and do a series, a short, digestible, dynamic look at the origins of different superstitions that we've all heard of, that we all sort of take for granted. Why we knock on wood, why we toss salt over our shoulder, why we're fearful of walking under ladders, how black cats got a bad reputation, and so on and so forth. And what we found as we were digging into it is that you don't find any one point of inception for some of these ideas. You find, for example, that the number 13 has negative connotations from different religions and different places of geography from all across human history, from Vedic culture to early Christian culture to the conjuring and magical cultures of the 19th century to certain African American mystical traditions. And it's remarkable to find that in the same way that humanity has a common language of myth, humanity also has a common language of superstition. We all seem to fear the same dark places. We all seem to gravitate towards the same good luck charms or insignias. There's a kind of universal language of superstition. So we choose a different superstition in each episode, and we spend about 90 minutes taking a very informative and rich and quick ride through where this superstition came from. So again, people can see it at originstheseries.com.
Excellent. And I'm curious, how has being the vice president and editor in chief at Tarcher Penguin enriched your life as an individual?
Well, what was so helpful to me when I first came to this publishing house about, now it's 17 years ago, was when I came here, frankly, I was directionless. I didn't know what I wanted to work on within publishing. I had been in publishing for several years. I had worked in political publishing. I had worked in different branches of nonfiction publishing, but I had no mission. I had no sense of purpose. And as I began to dig into the backlist of this publishing house, which is one of the early New Age and metaphysical publishing houses in America, I began to find a whole range of ideas that were extraordinary to me. New Thought, channeling, natural healing, the Enneagram, the Tao Te Ching, a whole range of things that I had only kind of sort of heard about before and that for the first time I was coming into contact with. And I realized that the roots of this publishing house and the roots of this subject matter were just filled with life, filled with possibilities, filled with options. And I wanted to learn more about these things, and I wanted to create a place where people who cared about these things could be published in an atmosphere of great seriousness and dignity and care and concern, as well as commerciality. And I felt that these topics should be published with the same level of meticulousness and care as any other serious nonfiction topics, whether it's history or journalism or social science. And that's what I set out trying to do at Tarcher Penguin. So it was very exciting to me because it gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me a sense of meaning, both within and without. I knew that I wanted to frame and publish and document this material, and that I wanted to participate in it. So I have to consider myself very lucky for having arrived here.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. And I'm curious, as you were doing your research for writing the introduction to There's a River by Thomas Segru, were there any facts or events that you uncovered about Edgar Cayce that are very much lesser known things that were kind of came as a surprise to you that you might be able to share?
Yes. One of the things that interested me is that there were 4 different occasions in Cayce's life where he reported being visited by this mysterious, large, Persian-seeming man who was dressed in white and was wearing a white turban. And Cayce was under the impression that this man belonged to the lineage of the great Mahatmas, or masters of wisdom, that Madame H.P. Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, said had visited her. And Cayce recorded 4 different instances in his life where he said he was visited, apparently, by one of these adepts or hidden spiritual masters or Mahatmas that had visited Madame Blavatsky. He didn't have any regular conversation or contact with them. These experiences were separated by several years apiece. They were quite brief, but they occurred at certain points in his career where he needed a vital bit of encouragement or a vital caution, or he needed some verification that he was on the right track. And Cayce said that's how he got it. So it was interesting. We tend to think of ourselves as occupying different houses, but in a certain sense, we're all really under one great big roof, because part of Cayce's tradition coalesces with the tradition that Madame Blavatsky described. So that was very interesting to me.
Absolutely. And again, looking ahead in the years to come, I know we kind of talked about our generation and how it'll be looked at, but I'm curious, what role do you see the work of Edgar Cayce and the A.R.E. playing as we move forward into the future?
A.R.E. has a very important role to play in the immediate future, because the truth is, it is one of the only New Age spiritual centers that is vitally healthy right now, whose membership is large and connected and growing, whose publications are ongoing and produced with an excellence. There certainly are other retreat centers around the country, of course. I mean, there's Esalen, there's Omega, there's a variety of growth centers. But A.R.E. is one of the very few organizations that emerged from the dawning days of New Age spirituality that has not only endured, but has flourished. And it's a very, very important gathering place for people across the alternative spiritual and mainstream spiritual spectrum. And you'll see at any A.R.E. conference, you find a remarkable mix of people, from veterans to homemakers to clergy to professionals, to the various, sandal-wearing New Age folks, God love them, who attend all the different growth centers. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful cross-section of spiritual culture in this country. And it gives people an opportunity, it gives me an opportunity to experiment with different ideas, whether it's the 12 steps, whether it's massage therapy, whether it's Course in Miracles, whether it's varying ideas from the Cayce readings, offshoots of those ideas, studies into lost civilizations, karma, reincarnation, astrology. I've benefited in all those ways from A.R.E.'s spiritual culture. And I think A.R.E. is one of the only places within the New Age culture that is membership-based, that is presently in the here and now, growing, thriving, building, adding to its facilities under new construction. So A.R.E. is playing an extremely important role in providing a kind of a gathering spot and clearinghouse for people who are in search. And that role demographically is going to become more and more important in the years ahead, in the months ahead, because the news coming out of different New Age organizations is news of, unfortunately at the moment, declining membership, declining publications. A.R.E. has reversed that trend. And that puts it in a very central and delicate and important position.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And Mitch, I wanted to thank you on a personal level as being such a huge fan of your work. I want to thank you so much for sharing all this and just doing what you do. But also on behalf of the A.R.E., I want to thank you for everything that you've done for us and being a part of our community, and also for writing that incredible introduction for There's a River. So thank you so much for joining us today on the show, and it's been an honor and pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. It's a privilege for me to be part of A.R.E. and to be a part of the Cayce community, and I very much enjoyed being here.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can visit arecatalog.com to pick up your copy of the latest printing of the Edgar Cayce biography, There Is a River, in which Mitch wrote an incredible new introduction to. If you'd like to learn more about Mitch, purchase his books, or check out his original web series called Origins, you can visit his website at mitchhorowitz.com. On behalf of everyone here at moretalk.tv and the Association for Research and Enlightenment, I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, reminding you to stay educated and stay empowered. Thank you so much for tuning in to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Hope everyone has a wonderful week, and we hope to see you come visit us here in beautiful Virginia Beach this summer. Much love. Now it's time for the thought for the day here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And joining me for the thought for the day, as always, is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you again for having me. Always a
Of
treat.
course.
Thanks, Brent.
And if you can go ahead and read the thought for the day for our listeners today.
Be happy to. This thought comes from reading 262-3. They that would have cooperation must cooperate by giving of self to that as to be accomplished, whether in the bringing of light to others, bringing of strength, health, understanding. These are one in him. You know, the Cayce readings use cooperation in a really wonderful way. I was listening to a young mom the other day talking to her 3-year-old son, saying, "You need to learn how to cooperate with me." And I'm thinking, oh yeah, I heard that before. You know, that means you need to do what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. And so it was all centered around what had to be done at the moment. You know, I mean, it was really kind of in the physical plane. But when Cayce talks about it, when the readings talk about it, it's cooperation with God. It's cooperation with the Spirit. It's a cooperation with the Christ consciousness, the divinity within. And because when he's talking about, you know, bringing of light, bringing of kindness, you know, bringing of strength and health and understanding, it's on a much deeper level. That chapter in The Search for God on cooperation is a real eye-opener. It's really not cooperation with what I want or cooperation with another so I can get what I want through that situation. It's cooperation with the divine forces that we have to really step back, let go, and be receptive to what those creative forces have to teach us. I think it's a wonderful reading, this thought, and also a wonderful chapter in the Search for God book.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that this was the the first chapter in Search for God, and Cayce made it so clear through his readings that before we can accomplish anything, we all need to learn how to work together, and we all need to kind of, in a sense, get on the same page. Meaning, we have a set ideal, we know that what we're working towards, and we're trying to gain, a deepened spiritual understanding, which is the core foundation of cooperation. And I think this is incredibly pertinent to what's going on right now. Is we lack, I think, in general, both as individuals and collectively, we lack cooperation right now. I think we were never truly taught how to cooperate properly, and I think it's something that we're all working with. We're working with cooperating with our spiritual ideas, as well as allowing that to kind of filter into our physical relationships. And I think you made such a great point in saying that it's all about learning to cooperate with God, learning to cooperate with that guiding force that's always working through you. And I noticed in my personal life, the more I stray away from competition, which competition, of course, there can be healthy competition, but I think the more important thing that is not emphasized enough as we go through life is the importance of learning to cooperate with others. And he says himself, you can bring light, you can bring strength, you can bring health, you can bring understanding, as long as there's that cooperation, rather than this competition that seems to really pull everybody apart.
Yes. But that's really a good point that you make, this cooperation and the sometimes dealing with the opposition that we feel around us, and the competition that we feel with others. And the readings really talk a lot, and they emphasize a lot about cooperation with our fellow individuals, with humankind, so that we can understand our relationship with God. And, through the actions that we have with others, we'll have a better understanding. I think we'll have a better or closer connection.
Absolutely. And you raised a great point in that the opposition. I think so many there's so many times where we're posed against each other. We're meant to oppose each other, and the emphasis, the stress is really put on that opposition. I think the more we learn to transcend that opposition and cooperate with each other, we can accomplish some incredible things that are yet to come.
Yeah, I do too, Brent. Very good.
Excellent. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us, as always, on the Thought for the Day. It's a pleasure having you on.
Oh, thank you for letting me be part of the program. I really enjoy it. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you. You too.